If you look at what happened in the conflict very recently with Pakistan, not only did we have far superior weapons, but far cheaper weapons. And economics is important in war. You can't be shooting down a $50,000 missile with a $1 million missile. And therefore, economics becomes very, very critical. And therefore, the fact that we were able to reduce the cost and make them far superior to anything else just shows the prowess.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. If there's one standout factor in the comprehensive takedown of the Pakistan military, it is India's ability to mount a near impregnable air defense and simultaneously carry out precision strikes on enemy targets. Even better, this ability was inspired by an indigenous DefTech or defense technology backbone. Indeed, it was a wake-up call to the world and to India's adversaries in particular. At the same time, it also underlined the significance and importance of India's bid to pursue tech sovereignty. But there's a problem here. It begs one very obvious question, that why is it that this prowess that we see in DefTech, SpaceTech and so on is not replicated in other sectors of the Indian economy, say consumer goods? At the least, it would reduce India's dependence on imports and save precious foreign exchange. To answer this dilemma, we have in our studios today Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's the president for the Center for Domestic Economy Policy and also someone who has a consummate understanding of the intersection of technology and business. Welcome, Jaijit.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you.
I wanted to begin with your first thoughts on this DefTech capability that India demonstrated so visibly in the 4-day-old conflict.
Even before we get into DefTech, look at the election tech. The largest possible engineering marvel that we have, the social engineering marvel that we have, which requires intricate ability to do social engineering, to be able to get technology together, and we're able to get the results out in a record period of time with 16% of the global population. So when we apply our mind to it, we are able to execute. And that is what reflected in the DefTech. When the government got serious and applied its mind to it, it happens. Right? And so fundamentally, we have the ability, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the technology, we have the scientific rigor to be able to create the technologies or very quickly borrow and then absorb them and make them indigenous. And if you look at what happened in the conflict very recently with Pakistan, not only did we have far superior weapons, but far cheaper weapons. And economics is important in war. You can't be shooting down a $50,000 missile with a $1 million missile. And therefore, economics becomes very, very critical. And therefore, the fact that we were able to reduce the cost and make them far superior to anything else just shows the prowess. And we were able to do it because the government was dead serious about it. We got our institutions together. We had all these rumblings, oh, DRDO does not perform, oh, this does not perform, that does not perform. Everything performed, right? The Prithvi missiles performed. Every other missile that was put in, they all performed, right? And therefore, again, coming back to the point, India has the resources. It's the ability to marshal it together, and we were able to finally marshal it all together. And it's built on decades of work been done previously, right? Some of it was not getting converted into actual usable machinery and into defense machinery and defense equipment. That got polished off in the last so many years when the government focused on ensuring that we must have indigenous weapons, especially in light of the fact that if you look at the recent conflicts, none of them have been short-term conflicts. They have been long conflicts. Earlier, the view was that if it's short-term conflicts, we've got enough weapons to take care of it. If it's long-term conflict, who is going to supply them to us? Where do we go and buy? For that matter, where do we go and buy a malware? Where do we go and buy a cyber weapon? It's not even there in the market. When the war is on, people will be charging an arm and a leg for every single component. And we learned our lessons from Kargil. In Kargil, we were not allowed to use the mapping technology given by the US because in the fine print it said you can't use it during conflict situation. Why would the military buy maps if it's not for conflict situation? So we learned that and we built our own very vibrant and deep systems for the military.
Jaijit, the great point about the economics part of it, that you can't be using expensive missiles to take down cheap enemy missiles. But underlying all that you said is the Make in India part. So can you elaborate the Make in India part of this tech capability we just saw?
So coming back to your question on the Make in India part, it's not just Make in India, but also being able to integrate, because in the modern world, you can't make everything within one country. Nobody does that. Neither does US or Israel or Russia or China. But the point of Make in India is that do we have technological sovereignty over what we're doing? And that's a term I'd coined around 2005. The point is that I may not really own that piece of technology, but have enough geopolitical clout to ensure that it comes in unfettered to me. Nobody is able to choke the supply of that technology to me, and that's what technological sovereignty is. And the reason I'm saying that is that we need to keep the cost low, so we do need to make in India, but there are some things that we need to import, and therefore being able to integrate it with what you make in India becomes a very critical skill for us to have, and which we have demonstrated amply that we have that skill. Now the point again as to why we are not able to do Make in India, where are we in terms of Make in India? In military, we have very, very quickly and rapidly moved from most of our arms being imported to most of our arms being domestic. And that's a huge turnaround that happened. In one of these defense conferences that happened, in 2019, there were 100% foreign suppliers in that conference. 3 years later, there was 100% Indian suppliers. That's the kind of change that we have had. So we're definitely down to in the path of Make in India, certainly in defense and certainly in strategic areas. But I think the larger question would probably be that what about Make in India in the rest of the sectors? And that's something that we can really.
We'll just come back to that. Sure. I wanted to just stay on this NAVIC. So most of us are not aware that India has its own equivalent to the GPS, right? And the genesis, like you mentioned, is in the 99 Kargil war. It was denied to India. So I believe NAVIC played a critical role in this DefTech capability that India demonstrated to enable the precision strike. Why is it that NAVIC is much better than GPS?
Because GPS is controlled by the US government. I don't know how many of your viewers would have gone to Moscow for tourism. They will realize that what comes on the GPS on their phone is not the right place. It's kind of little scrambled. It's little off, and it doesn't take you to the right place. So if you want to have the precision strikes that we did this time, you'd need to have the military-grade GPS systems, which clearly the Americans will deny to us. And that's precisely why we needed an indigenous system, which for our military purpose is far superior than what any of it is available anywhere else in the world. The US just will not let us have the ability to have precision strikes, and not just to us, they will not allow it to anyone else. And so the only way for us to stand up and be able to do these precision strikes is to have our own GPS, which is very, very precise, and that's what NAVIC is all about.
And NAVIC, if I may follow up, is end-to-end indigenous?
It is indeed end-to-end indigenous. It is based on a bunch of satellites. And again in NAVIC, the question of economics had come in, because the point is not that NAVIC is only for defense and military purposes. Just like GPS has a civilian application and it has a non-civilian and military application, so is with NAVIC. Unless we have NAVIC being used by the civilians, the cost of putting up NAVIC becomes phenomenally high. And unfortunately, electronics has this economies of scale issue. So unless you do things at scale, the cost becomes very high. So when it came down to making the chips for the NAVIC, because what ISRO did was put the NAVIC satellites up in space, Now you need your phones to be able to receive it, which means the phones needs to have NAVIC chip in it. And those chips should be costing less than what's available elsewhere. Otherwise, why would phone manufacturers put that chip in? And that's where we went through a decade and a half of struggle, almost a decade of a struggle, because nobody was willing to actually manufacture chips which would support NAVIC. The government tried to put in a subsidy, came out with procurement plans where they would give an order to certain startup based out of Bangalore to be able to manufacture the chip. For whatever reason, it did not come through. And eventually, foreign players were brought in for the consumer side of it, not for the other part of it, not for the military part of it, just the consumer side of it, where they came in and they started supporting NAVIC. So it's been a long journey. I mean, it started in year 2000, just after Kargil, and it's only now that we have NAVIC in its full flavor. And NAVIC is also limited to our region, which is the South Asian region, because it is for a specific purpose.
I want to go back to the Made in India caption, which we began our conversation. So I had mentioned in the introduction too, I see a pattern here. So whether it's space tech, DefTech, in all of these sectors you have tremendous success, world class. But we do not see this in other sectors. So there is a dissonance here. Why is it?
So let me take a few counterexamples. If you look at our two-wheeler EV industry, it's the best in the world. No other two-wheeler EVs in the world come close to what we have in India. If you look at our software engineering, I don't even need to talk about it. Everybody knows our software engineering is one of the best. So there are many pockets of excellence that we have. Why is it that we do not have that excellence in a widespread manner? Again, I've been talking about the fact that we were a rich country till about the 16th and 17th century, not by selling vegetables to Europe, but because we had excellence in multiple technological areas, from steel making to zinc to dual metal alloys and so on and so forth. We had absolute textiles. We were the best in the world in all of these areas. So why is it that we're not able to replicate that a couple of 100 years later? I mean, now we don't have the colonial rule. And that's because the colonial structures have still been left behind. Again, that isn't an excuse, because they're gone for now 75 years. When anyone invests into India, and I'm only talking about domestic investors, they perceive an enormous amount of risk. Unless we do things in scale with this risk being taken out or reduced significantly, because risk will always be there when you put up an investment, but unnecessary risk coming from regulatory aspects, if they are taken away, then there is much more certainty into creating large-scale projects, which is where you can start getting innovation in. Innovation does not happen in a lab. Contrary to popular beliefs, it does not happen in a small little room where an engineer comes out with a better prefetch queue for a microprocessor. What do you do with that prefetch queue? Where will you put in? You'll go to an IBM or an Intel and say, look, I've got a better prefetch queue, maybe you can use it. And I've got a patent in it. What Intel or anyone else will say, fine, I've got 10 patents, you take them and you give me your one patent. Now what will I do with these 11 patents? Nothing. I don't have the ability to influence the ecosystem. So the best technology, as per the industry, is the one that has been adopted, not really the best in terms of technical abilities. And therefore, unless we have these big motherships, if I can call them, or platforms, for example, a processor is a platform in which many other components go in, will not be able to have the innovation that we're talking about. These platforms are not getting created because of the perceived risks. Also, we are late in the game. Now, if you're late in the game, everything has these economies of scale kind of an issue. So if I build up, let's say, a 1,000-ton plant, now I may think that's big, but somebody who's got a 5,000-ton plant will have a much lower cost. And if they're able to get into the Indian market, I will never be able to recover the cost of my plant and never be able to get a profit, which is what leads to concepts like dumping, right? So I am able to sell my products. If let's say I'm based in China, I'll be selling my products at only the marginal cost, which is the total cost is the cost of the factory, which is depreciated, plus the cost of people, plus the cost of raw material. Now, what a Chinese manufacturer will do is only cost it at the cost of the raw material and the cost of people at most. Electricity is free, plant is taken care of, and that's the price they will put it into India. Now, how can anyone fight against that? And this is actually prohibited under WTO. There are trade remedies that are provided, there are instruments that are provided to the Indian government to be able to use it, and to any other government to be able to use it to stop such flow from coming in. But when it starts coming in, we are obviously a rule-abiding nation, and therefore we ensure in great detail that we are picking up the right case. Because if we start jumping for every time a private sector cries wolf and says there is dumping happening, we might increase the cost of this entire economy. But if you look at US and look at China, China just put some 500% anti-dumping duty on an Indian product. US last year, when President Trump was saying that India is the worst abuser of trade, US put a 630% duty on an Indian product. They do not do much of the investigations that India does. And therefore, why should we be following a very different standard in terms of being able to protect our industries or provide safeguards to our industries? Again, that's another word that we keep confusing. When we say safeguards to industries, people call it protectionism. We protect the industry. Protectionism is different. Protectionism is where you put tariffs in. But safeguards is where you put anti-dumping duty so that there is no unfair trading, there is no unfair trade practices, there is no predatory pricing. Unless we provide this safeguard, it's very difficult for these large platforms to emanate from here. If you look at China, they also came in late because the West was there before. But the government of China backed up each of these very, very solid manner, and which is why we have all these platforms in China, which then creates an ecosystem around it, which is what leads to the innovation that they have been able to do.
So a large part of the de-risking which you mentioned has to do with the regulatory hangover, and there if we trace it, it's industrial licensing, Babugiri, and all these kind of, which to me it looks like India is desperate for a mindset reset.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's very well captured in this term that I heard from one of the foreign investors, that you lay out the red carpet for people to invest, and once you put in the money, you take away the red carpet. After that, you're left to the dogs. So you need to go in, have consent to operate, consent to set up, consent to operate, all the other certifications that you need. Even after you set it up, you will have a whole stream of inspectors coming in. We have not been able to solve it. When did we have the last boiler blast? And even then we have a boiler inspector coming in. We do not have a centralized boiler. And if you've got 10 factories around, why not have a centralized boiler and have it driven by the state and let it be their responsibility and their inspector?
So very common sense responses.
Very, very commonsensical. There's nothing out of the world. But the point is, it's whose responsibility, who should do it, which department, which person, who in the government should do it, because government is a very fluid word, right? Who is the government? It works in a very structured manner. It's like a machine. Now we have to figure out which part of the machine has to be changed so that we can start doing, let's say, plug and play. Why should I not be able to just come in like in a hotel, put up my machinery and be able to operate? And rest you take care of it. Make sure that the hotel is taken care of. So it's not just setting up and operating. Post that, defending our industries from onslaught from others. So this entire gamut has to be seen, because the moment, and I've seen factories after factories, the moment they put up something which is new, for which we were importing, the importers would drop their price by half straight away. And these are typically, again, Chinese importers who would drop their prices, make sure this factory dies or goes through a financial burden, and then they can come back and increase the price, which is actually what happened with something as critical as penicillin G, which is an antibiotics, very, very important for soldiers. The moment you're got a nick, you're supposed to have penicillin G so that you do not get infected. Now, it was selling at $22 per the unit. It's a complex unit, and there were 4 companies producing it in India. 3 of them were PSUs, 1 was private sector. The Chinese came in and started selling it at $6. And even the Indian government procurement started happening from these Chinese companies. By 2012, all of the producers of penicillin G in India had shut down. And then the Chinese came back and were selling these penicillin G at the same $22. Till date, they're selling it at $22. And now our government has come out with the PLI for penicillin G, where we are putting taxpayers' money to make sure that we get penicillin G, which is important to do. But This is the game that gets played continuously. And therefore, when we're talking about Make in India, it's not just setting it up, it's not just operating, it's not just Inspector Raj, it's also the attacks, the trade attacks and economic attacks that we're getting from outside, which becomes a huge issue. Since we're talking about attacks, I just wrote this article very recently. If we do not have KTB being produced in India, it's a potassium chemical, we will not be able to have submarines going to the sea. It's as important, as critical as that. There are only 3 countries in the world which produce KTB. One is US, one is China, and the Indian technology was created by DRDO, run by a small MSME. But now the Chinese are dumping in India, the US is dumping in India in a very targeted manner. That these are chemicals important for defense, and we need to immediately react to it. It takes a lot of time for us to react. Similarly, if you look at insoluble sulfur, you look at PX13, these are terms that nobody knows. We know what is BrahMos, we know what is Akash, we know what is Shaktiman truck. The tires of the Shaktiman truck cannot be made unless we got PX13 and insoluble sulfur being made in India. And again, these are coming under severe dumping from China. So once they finish it off, these off-the-road tires that are made will be dependent on China. So when we have a long-drawn war happening, we'll run out of our vehicles, right? Because they'll get bombed. There will be Shaktiman trucks being decimated. The WAP vehicles of Tata's, the 8x8 vehicles, they will get decimated. We need more parts. We need more tires. We need more of everything. We need to make sure that industrial depth we have, and it's not impacted by any dumping that happens in a targeted manner by the neighbors that we have.
We'll leave it at that. A very poignant note to stop our conversation. And you heard, Jaijit, India's DefTech performance in this conflict was unbelievable. But as Jaijit pointed out, this transition from DefTech dependency to dominance is welcome. But the subtext of this is that there are lots of challenges. Some are homegrown, like you mentioned, the regulatory overhang, Babugiri as I love to call it. On the other side, you have our strategic opponents, often sometimes friends like the United States, who are not keen that India develop this kind of indigenous capability. So, but I always believe in the concept of a half-full cup, and it's a first step, but at least the direction of change is very visible, and presumably India's DefTech best is yet to come. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNewsGlobal.Tech on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates, and please to share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.